On the Mothers in Arms podcast, we'll be talking to psychologist Louise Carroll. She is the creator of a 12-week program called Wisely Attached, where she helps you heal anxiety, master triggers, and transform relationships. She's also been a featured guest on the Therapy Room podcast, and she plays a mad bass in the band The Blizzards. And from a professional psychologist standpoint, the way Louise talks about empathy and how it is a core value is something I really connect with being a new mom and being in a new relationship at this point in my life, in my late 40s. And so this conversation, since Louise is a friend, it just felt very natural for me. I find what she does for a living really interesting, and some of the points that she brought up, I just connected with them and how I'm juggling to balance this with my toddler and my boyfriend, co-parent. She made me realize how similar taking care of the ones you love requires being mindful at all times. And listening back, this interview, I can hear my voice. I could hear it. I was coming off of being stressed. A common daily battle that I can either let get the best of me or I know better now. It's best to put that energy where it matters. So let's get started. This is Where is My Empathy? Louise, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yes, and Wisely Attached is a 12-week program to heal wounds, master triggers, and transform relationships, and primarily the relationship with yourself, because that has to come first before you transform any other relationships, whether it's your family or romantic or even colleagues or friends.
100% the one with yourself. I mean, it's so funny. Like if you don't have yourself dialed in, if you're not comfortable in your skin and own up to your downfalls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you said that, because that is actually one of the biggest parts of it. It's accountability. Accountability changed my life, I'll be honest with you. and that's being able to, after a sequence of unfortunate incidents, that's a really kind way of putting it and a gentle way of putting it, over years in relationships, at some point, it's going to benefit you to look at the ways in which you are showing up. And it's not about blame at all. It's about shifting your attention away from the ways that you don't have power to the ways that you do. And it is a fundamental part of this entire process. And it actually can, with the risk of sounding a bit cliche, it can genuinely set you free from being in a sort of state of feeling trapped in your relationships, or trapped not being able to get into a relationship, or any type of mental or emotional state that makes you feel stuck or that you're reliant on another person, is the opposite of accountability. So to be able to take that on in your own life can really legitimately change your life. So yeah, it's constantly evolving.
I mean, it does change your life when you own up and you are accountable. I don't need to let someone know I'm upset the second I'm feeling upset, right? No one ever rushed. There's no need. It's not a 911 to let someone know you're upset with them, like you can sit with why you're upset on your own and process that and figure out what you really want to say about it, if it's really that big of a 911, before you talk to that person about it, is not always how I've lived my life. But now that I'm trying to teach my daughter this, I'm learning all this stuff on my own again. Not on my own, that's not true. I'm through therapy and through just like online coaching and through just podcasts I'm listening to. By the way, I think I follow you on social media, and I love your posts and the quotes that you say. I like to take that quote and just process it for more than one day, it's like keep referring back to it in order to keep building these key elements of being empathetic, right? I think is
Mm-hmm.
key. Right now, I find myself really needing to learn what it means to be empathetic. Otherwise, my daughter is going to keep crying. She's going to keep
Yeah.
having that tantrum.
Yeah.
If I keep saying stop crying, stop crying, stop crying, she's not going to stop crying.
Yeah. 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 That's it. And ultimately, what we're talking about is emotional regulation. How do you regulate your own nervous system, even in the face of challenges and conflict and a child crying, which, let's face it, women particularly are wired to respond intensely to that sound. So you're navigating nature there as well. But regulating your own nervous system and containing your own emotions is essential for that, because if you're able to contain yourself, well, then you can make space and a container for the little one. And for the little one to be able to, I mean, provided there's nothing physically wrong, for the little one to understand that actually all of your emotions are welcome and they're so intense now. And yes, your sock is a different color than you thought it was going to be. And that is devastating to you right now. And I get it, and that's okay. And you are really sad, aren't you? You're really sad. I know, I can hear it. Versus, oh my God, I can't cope with this sound and I need to shut it down because it's making me anxious. And now I'm in that cycle with you where
And
it's a battle. Yeah.
yeah, it's a battle. I go like this because it feels like I'm hitting my head against a wall because it feels like a battle that I'm not winning no matter
Yes.
what, no matter what I do. But if I were to, as you say, when I got to tell you, it's not often, but when you say it the way you just did, right? Just with all the calm in the world and you're sad, aren't you? And let's sit there. Let's sit there.
Yeah.
Have to say,
Making that space for her.
yeah, yeah, don't say anything else. Just
Yeah.
that's what helps to calm her down.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
know?
you're with her. You're with her. You're in it with her. But you've made all this space for her to be safe in it, in the depth of what she's feeling. And and she's contained. She's safe. And
Yeah.
that's what her little body's going to feel, that she's safe. Even though she's upset, she'll feel safe in that container with you.
Just have to use that same tactic with my boyfriend.
Perfect. Yeah.
I thought I'd create this podcast called Mothers in Arms.
Yeah.
And I honestly, it started with the story of me and how I became a mom in my late 40s. Really, it took me 6 years to create my daughter. Um, but in the time waiting to become a parent, I just noticed how I moved about life. And there's people who have kids and there's people who don't have kids. And it's two worlds. And then you already, besides the class world, you got the world with the parents and the non-parents. And I just started feeling how, you go about life never worrying about if you're going to be a parent or not, and then suddenly you're trying to have a child. And then I ran into all of these issues with my biology, and I couldn't get pregnant. And you start on this like doctor's appointments after doctor's appointments of checking this, flushing that. And then you get into fertility treatment, if you're lucky enough to have the finances to go to that next level, at the time I did. And so in this 6 years, right, of not having a child, but being married, right, the question I got constantly was, do you have kids? Why not? When are you going to have kids? Why don't you want to have kids? And it was just like through the years, my answers would be very defensive. I noticed. I would get very, nervous about it. I'd feel my heartbeat going, and I just was thinking, like, why do people always ask this? Like, why is this a question that we get so often? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
nice to meet you. Do you have kids? Are you married? Like what this need to be like, that's the top question,
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, don't you want to know other things about me? Like I felt like, don't you want to know like why I'm at this restaurant with you? It's nice to meet you, don't you want to know like more about me? I'd rather get the question, what do you do for work? Or do you work? You
Yeah.
know, then, it feels like them not knowing, but it feels like, why does your biology not work properly?
Yeah.
Is essentially the question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, two layers to that. Firstly, um, when you're moving through something as painful and as difficult and as challenging as that sounded like it was for 6 years, I mean, that's so much of your headspace, so much of your attention, so much of your emotions across the spectrum. And then you're also trying to live your life. You're also trying to do things that's expected of you on a day-to-day basis, whilst also holding this depth of want inside of you and trying to find answers and trying and hoping that you can trust the professionals that are engaging with you, that they're going to lead you into essentially getting what it is that you so deeply desire eventually. That is a whole lifetime that you're living in this space of those few years. And so when somebody comes up and says that to you and asks you that question, because it's uppermost in your mind, it feels like a slice and a judgment because it's up close to your mind. Whereas for the next person who doesn't think anything of it and it hasn't even considered it yet, it wouldn't land that way, right? It would just be a dismissive question because they don't really value the topic, perhaps. They haven't thought about having kids. Maybe they don't want kids, in which case that question is irrelevant to them, right? So questions land with us from other people, very much dependent on the landscape that we're living inside of ourselves. And so if it is raw and open and hot for us, it's going to feel like a wound when someone asks that question. That's the first thing. The second thing is, why do people ask that question all the time? Well, because it's a cultural expectation. And people love to know what to expect of somebody else. They love to be able to put somebody else into a box. They love to be able to know very, very quickly who it is they're speaking with, what type of person they are, and how quickly they can gather that information is very relevant to how humans communicate. And they're called schemas. How do we put people inside schemas? We very quickly always make an effort to get a sense of another person. And so when we ask the question, do you have kids? Do you have a family? Are you married? We're getting at the root of some very deep seated cultural expectations. And those expectations are expected stages of life. And for the person themselves, it helps them know, well, you're this kind of person. If you're a mother, you're this kind of person. That means that your days are taken up with this, this, and this. That means that you're probably not doing this, this, and this. Right. So already we have a certain amount of information about the person sitting or standing across from us. And as humans, that makes us feel safe. So there's very psychological drivers behind statements that can land in such a multitude of ways with somebody else. But for the person, they're trying to get a sense of this other person. Now, the other thing to say is that we also, depending on who's asking the question, because it could just be a off the top of their head question, or it could be another driver behind asking the question is, are you conforming to societal expectations? And if you're not, that makes me feel a bit threatened if I have conformed to societal expectations.
Right.
So, and again, there's so many ways the question can be answered or asked, right? And there's so much meaning that can vary between both sides. And worth and status comes into play actually in both of them, depending on where each person places having children or being married or having a family on the sort of spectrum of what success or a good life is.
Right, right. It's so right when you said about where it lands on depending on the landscape that you have, right? If you don't know your landscape or if you're not comfortable with what your landscape is, yeah, it can feel like a volcano. It's a, like very unstable ground, right? So that makes a lot of sense, right? If you know, I feel like if you already know how to deal with or answer, you know, that question of, gosh, no, I'm not able to have children because I'm infertile, and not feel threatened by, saying that, just like pass the butter, I'm infertile.
That feels like a lyric.
Um, just help people understand how common it is. It's 1 in 6 people have this, it's like having cancer. It's like having any kind of other genetic disease, but this one particularly, because becoming a parent is just such a common cultural thing, right? That it's like, it's one of those things that, I never really felt like everybody needs to be a parent, right? Like the job of a parent is really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a clock in, clock out, turn the button on. I'm here. I don't want to be here today, so let me just lie in bed. Like it doesn't, there's no and not everybody deals with it in the best way, with having, rambunctious toddlers, difficult teens. Like, and this job I have is a life job,
Mm-hmm.
but, you know, um, the terrible twos through the terrible threes through the fours and the fives, it's like, it's a part of your life that you give up to allow somebody else to,
Elevate them. Yeah.
So yeah, I understand this, not everybody wanting to do this and not everybody should, you know
Agreed.
um and I feel like more people, I would love to get that people to understand that, to know that not everybody, even if they're together in a couple, your statements of saying, gosh, do you have kids, like leading with these questions can make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And unless you're ready to have that uncomfortable conversation, think twice about, asking this loaded question.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I really agree with that. And, one question that I tend to, for years now, that and this is a personal fascination as well as a professional fascination. When people say, oh, yeah, I can't wait to have kids, I'm going to have kids. Oh, yeah, when I'm married, I'm going to have kids. And I'll say, well, why do you want kids? Which seems almost like a provocative question. Well, why would you ask that? You know, what's your answer? Why do you want kids? What's your answer? And sometimes people have a quick answer. Well, because I've always loved kids. I grew up always loving kids. I just want to be a mom. I've always wanted to be a mom. Fine, okay. It's sort of very natural instinct from a very young age. You've always had it. But for other people, sometimes it stumps them. And sometimes they say, well, um, because it's good to be a mom, it's part of having a family, it's what you do. And you can see the cogs turning a little bit. Well, and then they'll come up with more answers like, well, because it's nice to care for other people, it's nice to raise something that's a part of you, it's nice to bring another human in that's a part of you and your partner. And yeah, okay, but let's dig a little deeper. What does it look like to have a child?
I remember getting this question a lot, like, right? And I remember once saying, well, why do I want kids? I remember answering someone back saying, why do I want kids? Why do, just like, what if I don't want kids? What if because at that point I was really settled with the idea of not having children,
Mm-hmm.
right? So my guard was extra up. My armor was this thick at that point, bolted shut. And I remember saying, kids, I don't need to have kids to feel fulfilled in my relationship. My partner and I, my husband and I, we are going to connect on things we love, traveling, our dogs, our home, our careers, right? There was like so many things, our charities, everything. It was like there was other things that I felt were going to fulfill us. Um, so I do believe that. I mean, I believed it then, I really, and we were bonded. I don't want to get in, it's a side note on how we got divorced, but
Mhm.
back then, you know, since I wasn't, my energy wasn't going to my children, I was completely dedicated to my husband and there for, you know what I mean? So I felt
Mhm.
like I fulfilled his life and he fulfilled mine so much that I really didn't think that we needed children.
Mhm. Mhm. And sometimes, and it's not uncommon that couples sort of on the brink of a breakup on who are sort of embroiled in a lot of difficulty or arguments or conflict over time believe that a baby is going to make it better, or going to bring them together in a much more deeper, meaningful, profoundly connected, obviously, way. But it's different about being practically connected than being intimately connected. And in fact, of course, your intimate connection actually goes down for the first year
Well, I was
profoundly.
just going to
Yeah,
say, I feel like it does quite the reverse. Like
exactly.
there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing that kills the mood more than, minding a toddler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have zero intimacy time. They go to bed so late. They wake up so early, that some they don't want to nap. I mean, there's what
Mm-hmm.
time do you have to actually be with your partner?
Yeah. But then there's also, I mean, there's so many, again, layers to that, right? There's the practical layers of it that interfere with their connection. And then there's the actual emotional layers, which is you've now just become a mother. And, the term matrescence, which is like moving from being a single individual female into now a position where you're caring for another person. And as you say, you can't clock off. There is no off button. And that can be a massive shock to people who have wanted kids all of their lives, have not gone deep enough into the space to realize what it is that actually happens when they have a new human that's theirs. And there's a grieving period. And that grief is to do with what you are leaving behind, the person that you were. You're no longer that person. And you're also trying to care for another person and balance your hormones after going through this unbelievable, miraculous event. And all of that is weighing on your own emotional health as an individual, never mind as a mother, never mind as a partner. I mean, it is the most intense experience for a woman to go through. And really, there's only recently, I feel, more attention being put on, not enough yet, I might add, but more attention being put on that transition for a woman from being a single individual into now being a 24/7 raiser of another human being.
For
It's
sure.
huge.
For sure. I mean, I have a unique experience of that, because of my infertility issues, I had to have a surrogate carry my child.
Mhm.
And so for me, the transition was even more like I landed on Mars, right? Nothing hormonally happened to my body, right? One day I was hiking, and
Yeah.
out to dinner. The next day the baby came, like it was, here's your baby, right?
Yeah.
So, and this was also in COVID where I didn't see, my surrogate mother was not nearby me, right? She's over there. I see her on Zoom. I'd seen her at a couple doctor's appointments. Yes, but I'm not carrying this child, right? I don't have this ability to bond.
Mm.
And suddenly, I can't shower. I can't go to the grocery store. I can't go to pick up a coffee, because I was an independent parent, I didn't have anyone, no partner to ask to, hey, will you help me so I can
Mm.
shower that? And it was COVID. So having someone around was challenging, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Wow. And
I also,
how uh, uh, that that's like, I mean, that's just the way you put that is so visceral. Like one day you're hiking and the next you have a baby in your arms, and you can't shower. I mean, how was that adjustment for you?
literally,
How
I mean,
long?
it's funny. I say hiking, but that was true. But the day before, it's funny enough, I had, my single friends threw me a baby shower. So it was a rager. I was going to say I was definitely hungover, which is, I mean, who says I was hungover, a couple days before my child arrived? I have to.
Love it. Love your honesty. So interesting, and it brings up the issue of emotional health in the context of medical issues, which is rarely, again, I think these things are evolving, and in some departments it's getting better. But even, I mean, as a slight sidestep, even with like, contraception, birth control pills, and there's the coil, those kinds of things. There's sort of a lack of acknowledgement that these things cause emotional impacts in the body and on the mind, and that it impacts your mood. And so the focus historically has all been on the physical impact of these types of interventions or these processes, be it surrogacy or anything outside of that. The focus is on the physical and then the practical. And I get it to a certain extent, but nothing that we do is without emotional impact. Nothing. It all has impact on us psychologically. And what's more important actually is not so much the event itself, it's how we make sense of it. What does being prepared emotionally mean as a surrogate parent? And again, I feel information about this and the impact and the psychological impact of these kinds of processes we're only really evolving and getting a little more and more and more insight over time as to the impact of that. And yes, you can be a bit cut and dried about the thing that you've chosen to do and know that it's a contract. But again, it doesn't mean there isn't an impact on you. And you can shut the door on it and you can emotionally avoid it. But again, it's leaking out in some way. Anything that we push down is going to find another way to express itself. And that's just a fact.
This interview is longer. We ended up talking for a while. Like I said, it felt very natural to talk to Louise. So there is another little social media tidbit I'll do about that, because it was fun talking to her about growing up, similarly respecting our elders and how that shaped how I grew up. So thank you for listening. If you are watching this episode on YouTube, can you please take a minute to like it? Maybe follow us on there, or maybe even share it with someone you know that may connect with this content. Our handle for TikTok and Instagram is @mothersinarms.pod. The following episode is the shadow breathwork for this. They're meant to pair and nudge you to engage with your core. I'm Leslie Lopez. Thank you for sharing this safe space, and thanks for listening.